Kevin,
Yeah, baby.
we're doing this.
Oh my God. What do we say? Where do we begin?
What exactly are we doing, huh, Kevin?
That's a great question. We're enjoying a Monday morning um, and I think intentionally connecting and sharing, which is something that you and I have discussed in the past, something we wanted to do.
Absolutely. And I want to just say, not just a Monday morning, it's a unique Monday morning in that it's Labor Day Monday
Hmm.
morning.
Hmm.
Part,
Yeah,
part of me wonders, what does that say about our commitment to do this, as we're doing it on a stat holiday?
that's a good point, Ben. I mean, the first thing that comes to my mind is the beauty of balance. And I know, like for myself, I try to find healthy balance in life. And a part of me wants to enjoy this time off and get some rest in because to me, that's something that's important. I value rest. And at the same time, I also value growth and opportunity, forward momentum. And this is something you and I have discussed. And I'm grateful that we can sit down and do this together.
Yeah. I'd be curious because as you're talking about balance, my mind immediately goes to balance between work life. Maybe that's the
Hmm.
simplicity of it. And so immediately I thought of this conversation as work. I mean, in my mind, in some ways it is, right? Both you and I are doing this because we want to promote our respective works. You as a counselor and coach, and me as a coach and consultant. We'll get in more into that. But yeah, it's funny. I'm curious when you think about our conversation because you use like connect and share. Like, do you think of this
Hmm.
conversation as work or not necessarily in your mind?
Well, it's funny, the moment you hit the record button, it almost feels like work, right? It feels
We're
like
on we're on the we're on the
we're
clock.
on the time, there's a spotlight on us, but at the same time, like I'm glad you brought in that balance and even the idea of like what work feels like because I got into this, work because it became more of a passion and more of a way of life as opposed to like this 9 to 5 clock in and clock out mentality. And so, yeah, I mean, like there's aspects of it that feel like work. And at the same time, it doesn't, like because we're just having a conversation. This is what we do when we're quote unquote off the clock, and we're just bringing that into spotlight and allowing ourselves to be seen. And I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Honestly, I think this the same, and I think I want to say for the better. For me, it's because I similar to you. I like my work nowadays. I love it. It's very much a passion project. It's very much something I deeply care about. Yes, it's an
Mhm.
avenue for making money because that it is important. I'm sure you and I will get into this idea of money, but yeah, and you know that I sometimes I'm a little bit too into my work, but I find that the work I do now very much fulfills me in ways that, let's say, my previous work didn't, or I didn't know how to take that fulfillment from my previous work. So yeah,
Mhm.
even though you're right, we're on the clock, it feels like a regular conversation you and I would be having. And in fact, I love
Yeah.
these kinds of conversations. I think you and I have talked about this. I'd love to have more of these types of conversations with my other friends where we just kind of
Mhm.
have this in-depth conversation about things.
Yeah, I appreciate that word that you brought in, which is like depth, and I hear that you value these types of conversations, whether at work or in your personal life, where there's a feeling of depth, where we can almost share parts of ourselves that maybe society kind of teaches us not to. And I hear that you value that.
Yeah, big time, man.
Yeah. I'm wondering if you'd be open to maybe sharing your story and what brought you here.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll ask the same of you. But every time I'm asked that question, I have to start at the beginning because my childhood, I believe the way I understand it, plays a big role in that.
Mm,
It's funny.
for
I'm
sure.
like, am I talking to Kevin or am I talking to them? I'm gonna do my best to be talking to Kevin and not to have my podcast or whatever voice on. So,
Okay.
um, yeah, man, it comes back from childhood. pretty normal childhood in the former Yugoslavia.
Mhm.
Grew up playing in the streets, had pretty good family connection, and things were going well. And then I remember the war started, and it didn't feel traumatizing. It still doesn't, but man, it did shake life up. Like we kind of had to go to the bomb shelter of the building right away.
That's crazy.
Anyway, I say all this because then, fast forward, we came to Canada as refugees, immigrants. I didn't know a word of English.
Mhm.
And so I had this feeling of like not belonging. And even for a long time in my life, I felt like I didn't belong as a Canadian. My English or whatever wasn't great. The culture wasn't fully Canadian. So then there's
Mhm.
always been this like desire, like belonging. Also, I wanted to be a teacher for a long time.
Mhm.
And there's like people are like, don't be a teacher, be something that makes more money, that's more reputable. So I went to do engineering. Anyway,
Mhm.
long story short, I did engineering. I didn't love it. And it started getting me to think about what are my career decisions. And I found myself coming back to this idea of teaching, but not just teaching, like teaching and creating spaces where people felt a sense of belonging. That thing that I didn't
Mhm.
feel when I came to Canada as a refugee. So I think you and I were talking about it just now before this discussion, like who is our audience? And in some ways you're right. Like I am my own audience. I want to speak to the people that feel that they didn't belong at some points, that they felt they had some conflict. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm serving VJ of the past and also
Mhm.
anybody else that is struggling with the sense of belonging. Man, that was a fucking long ass answer to your question. So feel free
Uh,
to dissect anything there, Kevin.
well, yeah, I was gonna say I feel like it's not long enough. I because you I feel like you
Don't tempt me,
summarized
bro. Don't tempt me.
I feel like you summarized like the last part of your life uh pretty quickly, but you also made some incredible points. Like even the sense of belonging, how you realize how important that is to you. And I can imagine every single person can relate to what that feeling is like, the feeling of belonging and also the feeling of not belonging. So you mentioned like we had this conversation before that we started recording, like who is our audience? And I shared, we are our own audience because of what you just shared. Like you went through life, you're kind of told what to do, it's going to make more money, and yet there's like this gut feeling or something inside of you was telling you that you wanted to live a life that was more fulfilling, that was more in alignment with your values, and where you felt like you belonged. And now, like you went through this career that you didn't like, you made a really hard decision to start your own business, to leave that career that provided some comfort, security, some financial safety, and just to like find what helps you belong. And here you are, now you're helping other people find what helps them belong. And I think that's incredible, and I think a lot of people will be able to relate to that, where they might feel stuck in their life and they're like, hey, like I also was told to work in engineering or to work a career that just didn't feel aligned with my values. I didn't feel fulfilled. So I really appreciate you sharing your story, man, because I feel like that will help people understand maybe where they are in their lives and whether they feel like they belong or not.
I appreciate that. One, your reflection on what I said, and it's nice to hear a couple of things as you were talking stood out that I'll quickly share. I know, I think often sometimes I get like VJ, but you had this like worn torn experience. I don't come from that background, so I don't feel strongly about whatever. And something you said that like other people can relate, everyone, and I think I think sometimes there's this misconception that you had to have come from this like traumatic experience. But like you said,
Mhm.
I think belonging, not belonging is very much like a human trait, and it kind of it doesn't matter. Like I don't right. Like I think somebody's like, oh, I haven't had that kind of severity of a problem in my life, but it's all relative. Somebody could have experienced it in another sense, you know?
Dude, absolutely, man. I feel like from like a primal perspective, like we all need to belong in order to survive, right? When we think about going back to the tribal years, like we needed to be part of a tribe in order to survive. So belonging is like literally life or death. So there's a reason we feel lonely or stuck or lost when there's a lack of belonging, because it is life or death, and so we can all relate to it on any level. We can all relate to that feeling. Um, and we can also relate to feelings and to emotions. So like you mentioned, we like you lived this traumatic childhood, although you mentioned you might not necessarily consciously feel that trauma, yet you experience a traumatic childhood, and other people might not be able to relate with that, but what they can relate with is their level of trauma, is their fear, is their sadness, is their grief. We all experience emotions similarly, so we can relate on that level. We don't have to have the same experiences to understand and to
Yeah.
empathize with each other, and that's important as well. Like even like how many people in Canada can relate to you, similarly to leaving a home country and having to emigrate to a new country, like, right? Millions, tens of
Yeah.
millions of people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's which is why again I feel it's so important to share your story, and we can connect through our stories.
For sure. And I'd be curious to know your own story because, I've known a little bit about your journey and yeah, what's brought you to do the work you do now, but I guess what are your beginnings? I don't know if I've fully heard, some of that stuff, but yeah, what are the things that were your beginnings in sort of that shaped your worldview and what brings you to do the work you do today?
Yeah, appreciate the question. It's funny when you started to share your story, you're like, I almost always share my story from the beginning. And for me, I can relate to that. When I share my story, I share that my story began before I was even born.
Ah, interesting.
And because of the field that I'm in, mental health, um, I think it's important to honor and acknowledge intergenerational trauma. And so for my parents, like they both grew up in households with alcoholic parents. So all four of my grandparents were alcoholics.
All four.
So all four, yeah. So that was the environment that my parents grew up in. And my mom's way of coping was to eat food and sugar, and that was her coping mechanism. My father's was to bury his emotions, was to seek validation because his parents never told him that they loved him, that they were proud of him. So his whole life he's seeking validation, he's seeking belonging. So he's fighting for validation in that sense. And so my dad grew up, highly anxious. My mom grew up with food and sugar addiction, also highly insecure, highly anxious. And they found each other probably through their own trauma, and that's where I come in the picture. That's the environment that I grew up in, where my mom, she's like disgusted with herself and deeply ashamed, and same with my father. And that's the conditioning and the programming that kind of that I learned and was brought into. So my childhood was riddled with anxiety unconsciously. I had no idea. Felt like I was never good enough, felt like I didn't belong, felt like I had to prove myself, beliefs like I wasn't smart, wasn't intelligent, and that kind of like shaped my adulthood as well, because I always felt like no matter what I did, it was never enough. So I was always chasing this thing outside of myself to help me feel good about me, whether that was in relationships, in my career. Like there's always, I always had a belief that if I got married, if I had children, if I, bought a house, then I would be happy. If I, became a police officer, then I would be happy, which I didn't realize at the time, but that meant that I wasn't happy with who I was at in those moments. Um, So then I used alcohol, I used all these other substances to help me feel safe, to help me like love myself, to help me feel like I belong. Um, and that kind of that created a life for me that where I wasn't fulfilled, I wasn't happy. So I got into law enforcement, and 3 months into the job, I realized that it was the worst job I've ever had in my life. And yet,
3 months.
3 months in, and yet I had the belief that I was supposed to be happy. So you can imagine the effect that that had on me. The same way I got into a relationship and told myself I was going to marry this person. Meanwhile, it was a toxic relationship from date number one, but I was so afraid to be alone. I was so afraid for the world to see that I was unlovable that I continued to stay in this toxic relationship and be the recipient of emotional and physical abuse. Um, and luckily, and I say luckily, she ended up cheating on me, and that's when I hit my rock bottom. Here, like the world is exposing me that I'm unlovable, I'm not good enough, I'm miserable in my career, and there's moments where I didn't want to live. Like I was like so deeply ashamed. And through the support of friends and counselors, I decided to start making better choices for myself. Started to make choices that to follow this like feeling inside, and one of those feelings was to move to Vancouver. Um, so packed my bags, left that relationship, and took a chance on a new life and moved to Vancouver. And I was like deeply lost. Like I felt like a little child who was just so afraid, so lost. And because of this decision I made, each step of the way, I was shown the path that I was supposed to um, take. And so I met someone who essentially guided me towards making the decision of going back to school to become a counselor. And that kind of started my healing journey, being in a school that helped me look at myself and heal my trauma and heal my wounds every single day for 2 years. Um, changed changed my life, uh, and so 2 years of deep healing and deep trauma processing helped me get to where I am today, which, you know, I have anxiety, but I'm able to hold it and honor it, and I have the tools to process. And I can, you know, say with confidence that I love myself today. And I'm like proud of who I am and how far I've come. And now I have a private practice where I support other men with their mental health challenges. I facilitate men's circles, starting my coaching business. I teach coaching. So I'm like, I've never in a million years would I have thought that I would be here today, and yet I couldn't be more proud of where I am. And it comes through like learning from my struggle, which is essentially what what I teach, and like the sense of belonging, almost like coming back to the sense of belonging. Like I think like for me, the sense of belonging comes from within before it comes from like an external source. And I can only feel like I belong if I can feel it within myself. And that's where I am today. Like I deeply feel that.
Okay. Beautiful, man. Thanks for sharing, Kevin. Yeah, I didn't
Hmm.
know. I didn't know. I mean, I've known you for many, many years, and I did not know that fact about your grandparents.
Yeah.
Right. And I love that. Like you mentioned, like my story starts before I was born. That's something that I often forget too. And it reminds me, one time it was an indigenous speaker talking about intergenerational trauma that takes place, especially within their communities of how
Hmm.
long it takes some trauma. And one of the quotes he used was something that resonates with me was, "What we don't transform, we transmit. What we don't transform, we transmit." Right. And so who knows where it's coming from, that stuff. And even for me, who knows, like from my grandparents or, previous conflict in that region. Yugoslavia, somebody said it was a good idea, Yugoslavia. There was always some conflict there, and yeah, people try to make it work, but it was unsuccessful. But Interesting. I mean, so many places to go. Where do we take this conversation next, Kevin? I feel like the time just flies by as we're
Yeah.
chatting.
I feel like, yeah, how would you feel about maybe sharing either like how our worlds kind of intersect when it comes to sharing our stories, or even sharing like you mentioned like this sense of belonging. Like, how has your story brought you to this place where you're now helping, other people feel their sense of belonging?
Sure, let's go with that one. I think that's an interesting topic, this idea of belonging, because I do think it actually answers both questions, how our work overlaps. I think even though
Hmm.
we're doing somewhat similar, we're different in some ways. Who we
Hmm.
want to support and how we're supporting it is different. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think like similar to you, I moved out to Vancouver. I was also had experienced some challenges after a relationship. I needed a fresh beginning. Vancouver was that step for me in
Hmm.
2012. And I
Hmm.
remember I was 27, and it was, you mentioned again that idea of being okay to be alone, being okay to have that sense of belonging for ourselves. And so I think for me, Vancouver, I came out here by myself. I
Hmm.
really had to like find my own way in life. My brother and his wife had been living here, but they had kind of just left. I had
Hmm.
some friends, but man, it was tough. That first year was a lonely year. I read a
Hmm.
lot of books. I remember there was days where like I didn't talk to anybody, and for me, I love to talk, so that was an interesting thing, but it was also a good opportunity to be on my own and to sit with the discomfort and have some of those thoughts. And man, I almost came crawling back to Toronto. I remember that first year I gave my resignation to my landlord that I was leaving. I was about to
Hmm.
quit my work, but I didn't, and I'm glad I stuck through because literally the next day everything kind of started to change for the better. But I digress a little bit. Go ahead.
No, no, because I appreciate you sharing that, and I'm wondering, like, because in that I almost hear like you had to experience like this level of hardship. You mentioned like you felt alone, you were discovering your sense of self. You had to sit with your discomfort. Like, there's a point where you almost like gave up in a way. And I'm wondering, how do you think your hardship in these lessons, how do you think that shaped you with where you are today?
Oh, big time. And I think you said something about like learning from the struggle.
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
similar in that way. It's like I think of any challenge in life as an opportunity to learn and grow. So like big time it shaped me, man. Everything, like all those challenges, all those failed relationships. Like, I can be upset on one hand that they didn't work out, but at the end
Hmm.
of the day, I'm just grateful to have had that learning opportunity. So, and also lots of failed relationships. It's crazy how much I learned from those where, man, it was so easy for me to, you point one finger and I didn't realize I was pointing three back at myself. It was always something wrong with them, something wrong with this. And it was like, well, hold on a second. And there's a common factor in this. So, yeah, big
Hmm.
time, man. For better or for worse, I kind of need to have that kind of real challenge where I really feel it,
Hmm.
for it
Hmm.
to burn enough where I'm like, well, wait a second. I have to, like, there's a lesson to be learned here.
Dude, that's incredible, man. Because what I hear in that is like you've taken hardship, and you even used the word a few times, which is like failure, failed relationships, whatever. Like, you've taken these experiences which brought like pain, which brought struggle, which brought fear, and like the way you're almost describing it is through this sense of gratitude. And to me that almost reminds me, and I'd be wondering if you implement this in your business, but it's like the mindset of your experiences. So you've I hear that you've been able to learn so much from your hardship, and not only learn but also be grateful for it, and to have this feeling of gratitude. Like I get to learn from that, and I get to grow, and I get to be better, and I get to ask myself like, how what part did I play? And I'm wondering for you, like, how do you like, where does mindset come into to like the work that you do?
Yeah, the question I heard in that is like, how do I implement some of that into the work?
Hmm. Hmm.
I'm still figuring it out.
Okay.
I think the way I do it is kind of going back to something you said earlier, is that like in the work I do, I just help people see themselves in some way.
Mm. Hmm.
Let's just zoom out and let's observe yourself. And it's amazing. I think when they do that, they're
Hmm.
able to take on that sense of ownership, and it becomes less about like some this happened to me versus like I was a part of this. And so it is still
Hmm.
something I'm working out. I know even for myself, I have to practice gratitude because I mean, you and I have talked about that. I can be quite critical of myself, my perfectionism. Even as we started this recording off camera, we did like a little bit of a grounding exercise, which I think was
Hmm.
good reminder to ground ourselves. But it's still
Hmm.
very much a work in process. But I say what I try to do with my clients is one, just help them um,
Hey, I love that.
celebrate, right? Like what are the things to be proud of? Because sometimes it doesn't feel like there's a lot. So like let's take stock of that.
Hmm.
And just try to get into that habit of where they're doing that. But as I said, also just allowing themselves to see themselves from a different perspective.
Dude, that's beautiful, man. Because I think like what we struggle to do in society is to actually pause and cultivate like this, like cultivate to be here in the now, which then allows ourselves to actually look at us and to be challenged in that way is so important. So I see that you're like creating this space for people to reflect and to look at themselves, where they then can celebrate themselves. They can then be grateful for maybe some of their learnings or some of their hardship. And something that stood out uh, to me that from what you said is that you embody all of this, and I think there's no better teaching in life than someone who leads by example. And I hear that this is something that you value and that you embody, and in hopes that people will feed off of that and learn from you.
Yeah, I really try to. I really like but I also never want to come across as an expert. I often tell my clients and people I'm working
Mhm.
with, it's like, hey, look, these are things I very much try to do and I'm doing, but I'm also a student of this as well. I'm not perfect. And I even on this discussion, I don't want it to come across, well, I know we use the word perfect. I'm perfect
Mhm.
in the sense that I am trying to do this work and open to learning in new ways. But I never want to come across as like as an end all be all expert because I know there's much for me to grow and learn in. But I am
Mhm.
happy to share these experiences and learnings with others. And I think a part of why you and I are having this conversation is that maybe somebody can relate to our conversation. Maybe somebody can feel that, hey, look, maybe there's something for them to think about and take stock of their own story and what their sense of belonging or not belonging is, and
Mhm.
reflect on that and um, how it inspires their future steps.
Dude, I love that. I love that.
Oh,
Yeah.
Kevin, so many good things. Sorry, go ahead.
No, no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to bring it back to you. I'm curious, like what would I want to ask you at this point? I guess I'd be curious to know how do you do some of that stuff in your own practice? How do you help people connect to their own story and to their own sense of gratitude or what, their own sense of belonging? What are some things that you implement when you're working with your clients?
Yeah, it's a great question. And an answer that I almost always answer with is it depends. Depends on the person, depends on their situation, their struggle, what their life looks like, where they are on their journey. And yet at the same time, I think there's a lot of parallels that exist. And one of that is like we tend to be our harshest critic. And this is something you and I have talked about many times. And I think naturally we tend to blame ourselves. We tend to feel like we're not good enough. We need to do more, and that comes from a place of going back to like not belonging. Not feeling like we're good enough. And so I help my clients develop a healthier sense of self. I help them develop a healthier relationship to themselves, we turn that inner critic into like an inner cheerleader, and that like helps shift their mindset, which also helps shift their feelings. So when we don't feel like we belong or feel like we haven't made it in life, or we can't find a healthy relationship with a partner, like a lot of that comes from like this lack or this scarcity, this feeling of shame, regret, fear, and as opposed to changing that mindset to what are some things that you've learned from these experiences that will bring you into a healthy relationship? What are some things that you've learned about yourself that'll help you grow into the person that will help you feel pride? What are some accomplishments that you've already had in your life that you can celebrate and be proud of? And essentially similar to what you shared, like how can we bring gratitude in life, and just being grateful for the smallest things, like being grateful that we get to breathe every day, that we get to live in this city with so much nature, that we get to connect with friends and family, being grateful that I can eat a wonderful meal. It's like finding moments where we can be grateful as opposed to almost hyper focusing on that inner critic who never feels like life is good enough. And that in itself, I think, shifts so much. Um, uh, yeah, and that's a lot of the work that I do with my clients.
No, I love that. Inner critic to cheerleader. I love that, Kevin. And you're absolutely right. I can relate to it. Depends on so many facts. Where they're at, where am I at? What's my ability in that moment to hold space and do that, right? There's moments I'm not going to be a perfect coach or supporter. Um, you and I have talked about this a lot because I think we sometimes struggle to relate or feel a sense of conflict, let's say when comparing ourselves to some of our friends.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
I think that's an interesting thing, and I'd be curious, like, what's your thoughts on? Because I'll speak from my experience. I feel that there's this being grateful for the little things and really celebrating those and enjoying the simplicity of life.
Hmm.
But then also, how do you live life, to quote unquote, its fullest, and having a reliable car, being able to go on vacation,
Hmm.
having that house in Vancouver.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts? I think that's an interesting question
My
because it's
goodness.
like how do you maybe instead of thinking about the perfect solution, maybe how do you grapple with that in your mind as you're grateful but also determined for some bigger goals and financial success, whatever that may be.
Yeah, that's a great question, dude. And I mean, I could speak forever on this, and I'll try to stay concise. I think when it comes to comparison, we get stuck and lost in this idea that first of all we know what someone else's life is like and what they're experiencing, when the truth is we have no idea. Like someone who has a quote unquote successful business and they own two houses might be deeply depressed or have really unhealthy coping mechanisms. They might have an unhealthy relationship. They might be projecting their shame or feelings of not being good enough. I think something you shared with me was a Djokovic interview, no?
Yeah, just recently, yeah, on the Jay Shetty podcast. Yeah, yeah.
Right? And he mentioned that like he's probably arguably the greatest of all time, and yet he has a feeling that he's not good enough.
Yeah, he said
And
that. Yeah.
that comes from one of the greatest tennis players of all time. So you have Novak Djokovic feeling like he's not good enough. And bringing it back to this comparison is um, like, first of all, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice when we try to tell ourselves that someone's life is better than ours. And I think, again, it starts with that inner critic and inner belief about self. Like, if I believe that my life is not good enough, or I haven't done enough, or I'm not fulfilled, then we almost automatically compare ourselves to anyone else, that their life is better, that they're more successful, that they have what I don't have, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. Um, and yeah, the other thing I think is important to share is um, when it comes to like, oh yeah, this is what I'm going to say. Good or bad, right or wrong. So where do we develop what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad, right? So we develop that from our childhood. We develop it from our parents. So we're again being conditioned and programmed from their beliefs and where they develop what is right or wrong. So we've almost developed this societal expectation, this pressure that we put on ourselves that good or success equals a specific career or a specific amount of money. And don't get me wrong, having financial freedom is important and it can help support you. But if you don't have a healthy sense of self, if you feel like you're not good enough, if you have limiting beliefs, it doesn't matter what you have in life, you're always going to compare yourself to feel like you're less than, to feel like you're inferior to the people around you. And so really I think it begins with like your relationship with yourself and building a healthy relationship so you can recognize like, hey, I'm happy with where I am in my life right now and I strive for more,
Mm,
as opposed to being operating from a place of I'm not good enough, I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm unsuccessful, I'm failing, and I want more.
mm.
So speaking from my own experience, like if I were to compare myself from even like a practical sense, like there's people my age who, in our social circles who have mortgages, they have career jobs where they're making two or $300,000 a year. They have the nice cars, they go on the nice vacations. And what I've realized through my own personal journey is I don't even desire those things. And so I'd be doing myself a disservice if I compared myself to those people. And at the same time, I almost neglect all the other people who live similar lives than me that are so fulfilled and so happy, and
Mhm.
again, it comes down to like, where do we focus our attention? Like, where does that stem from? Does it stem from a place of lack, of scarcity, of not good enough? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, what you were just saying, what I just came to my mind is that one of the factors is that you mentioned we sometimes forget about those people who are feeling fulfilled, let's say living in lesser means than us. What just came to my
Mhm,
mind. And
mhm,
social media, I hate to say, but TV, it's funny. The people that live these glamorous lives are often the ones that are given these platforms and these voices that we sort of like look up to, but we forget about all those people that are, and it's funny because those people probably don't care to be on social media. They don't care. Even for myself, sometimes with social media, I find like, why am I on these platforms? Why am I doing this? Why can't I just be content with having this conversation between me and Kevin?
mhm, mhm,
But to the point is, I think you're right. I think sometimes there is maybe we're overly stimulated by those successes out there. But yeah, I mean, lots of things. You mentioned even about comparison, not really knowing fully what's going on with them. And that's one of the reasons I want to try to be as transparent and open in any of these kinds of forums where, like, hey, look, yes, I'm talking about things I'm passionate about and what I do, but by no means am I perfect. And I would be willing to open up those imperfections to show others that, hey, look, here's the shit I'm dealing with. It's
mhm,
okay. It's part of it. And I want to try to sort of create a world where I think what you said earlier, where we don't create these like false projections of ourselves, which now gives a sense of unrealistic expectations to others. And now they're comparing it to these false expectations. Well, wait a second. That's not the full story. But I understand humans are going to, it's not in our best interest right now, Kevin, to discuss all of our baggage and shit to some extent, and we're going to try to keep it on the wraps.
yeah, and I feel like even that belief comes from like a societal, like there's a societal belief that like we're not doing ourselves justice, or it's not beneficial to talk about our baggage, right? And that almost reminds me of like this societal shame that we exist in, where we deem baggage to be a bad thing. Like I want to connect with people that are that acknowledge their baggage, that have
Yes.
have uh, uh, grown from the baggage that they carry. Because I think a beautiful trait is resilience,
Yes.
and someone who has baggage and has lived a
First of
life
all,
with baggage.
who doesn't have baggage?
Exactly, exactly. So so if someone comes to you and says, "I don't have baggage," like you almost know that they're wearing this mask, or right? They're actually deeply ashamed because they don't want to share what they're experiencing, or the struggle that they've had in their life.
Yeah.
And for me, like I want to meet people who are authentic, and you mentioned something earlier, just now, that like reminds me that we it's important to share our story, and we almost have a duty to share our story, because we can lead by example. We can change this like societal expectation or fear or shame that exists when we can start being vulnerable and being authentic, and um, feeling like we do belong. And this is almost like a great full circle. We do belong, even if we do have baggage, even if we do, or if we had shame. And yeah, I think we have a duty to share our story, and to release that shame that exists.
Yeah, I love it. I'm taking notes here, Kevin. Good stuff. I love that. Celebrating the baggage for sure.
Yeah, brother.
And I know that in my work, I've always like I want to encourage people when they do that. It's like, hey, like that's something they've had to go through, and I want to first of all thank you for sharing that.
Hmm.
And yeah, it is important. I'm mindful of our time. We had said we're gonna our time my timer is about to go off.
Yeah, yeah. I've got 2 minutes on my timer as well.
We as expected, Ark, we you know we got lost in conversation. Do we want to start thinking about wrapping up at least this initial conversation?
Yeah, I think I really value that this these questions and these responses almost come back to this sense of belonging, and maybe there's a way where we can wrap up around this theme of belonging.
Yeah, maybe just some. Yeah, I agree. Let's maybe just some closing words. Do you want to share your closing words or maybe your reflections on this discussion? I can do the same, and we can wrap this up as our first sort of recorded conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to share, and keep a closing short, and I've shared, and I'll continue to share that my legacy is my authenticity. Um, I've found a sense of belonging and a sense of fulfillment from loving every part of myself, and this is a forever journey, and I'm not perfect at it, but um, I've come to a healthy sense of belonging, and a love to myself from honoring every aspect of who I am, and I feel like it's my duty to turn around and help other people find their sense of belonging, to honor and to love their authentic self, and the parts of themselves that maybe they've shamed their entire lives, and yeah, I'll leave it there.
Nice, beautiful, man. Thank you. I haven't heard you say that one before. The legacy is my authenticity. That's a good one.
Mhm,
Have you
mhm.
said that before, Kevin?
Have, yeah, many
Beautiful.
times.
Nice. That's a good catchphrase. That's not AI generated, is it?
Oh no, that's heartfelt, right from the heart.
Heartfelt. I love it. Let's see. I just appreciate, these kinds of conversations. And I know we didn't get into any kind of healthy disagreements, but I know you and I have those as well. And I think those are important. I think for me, this is just a good exploration of these kinds of conversations. And I think about, talking about being a role model. This is it. Like, this is the kind of conversations that I want to try to inspire others to have. I
Mhm,
used to be I don't want to say very shallow person, but I was somebody who would stretch myself out so thin with lots
mhm,
of different people that I never had the chance to go deep in conversation. Where I'm now having a bit of a 180 to that. My circle of friends has come down a lot, and I
Mhm.
prefer these in-depth conversations. And so, yeah, I think it's awesome that Kevin, you and I can have this and hopefully inspire or have others thinking about this kind of stuff. But yeah, I think like similar to you is helping people connect more to themselves, and then celebrating that whoever they are, whatever they do. It's like, hey, let's own that, let's love it, and but what do we do with it? That I think is where the beauty happens. So yeah, very cool, man.
Beautiful, bro.
Appreciate this
Yeah.
conversation, Kevin.
Likewise, brother.